Chernov. Thank you very much. Welcome, Mstyslav. I'm going to start by asking, if there were a postscript to this film, what would you add? What news, if any, about some of the subjects of your film?
Let me first thank everyone for being here, because I feel that we are, you all feel that probably, we live in a time when we are bombarded by tragedies, by headlines that need our attention, important stories which have an impact on our lives, but everything is happening so quickly, everything is happening at the same time, live, that it's very easy to forget, and it's very easy to close yourself from these tragedies and stop caring. And the fact that you are here means you care, and I'm really grateful for that. Recently, Ukraine became kind of a bargaining chip, a political topic, but I still feel that this is pretty much a humanitarian theme that we have to talk about, this humanitarian catastrophe, and that's the reason why I focused on the humanitarian impact and the impact on the civilians in this film. And I am trying to remind everyone about that, about the humanitarian side of it. It's been 10 years since Russia's invasion in Ukraine, and 2 years since the full-scale invasion, and things are not going well. And I feel like that thing I said in the film, that how can more death change anything? It's kind of still true, because it doesn't feel like things are improving. But at the same time, yesterday I saw announcement that Russia has made a scripted film about Mariupol, and they filmed it on the location. They sent crews, when they occupied the city, they sent crews there and actors, and they made a big budget scripted film. They called it 2022 Mariupol. So if you are in Russia, you probably Google 20 days in Mariupol, you get their scripted version. And that's really scary, like really scary, because they will screen it for millions of people. And that's the only reality they will get, right? Unless they really want to find out. So, knowing all that, we are going forward. And 20, it's just a number. We followed up with everyone. Mariupol was never left behind for us. We investigated the bombing of a drama theater. We investigated the re-education and kidnapping of Ukrainian children who were deprived, who were stolen their identity and re-educated into Russian identity, which is a war crime. We investigated how Russian authorities just demolishing all the high-rises that burned and were bombed, and by doing that they erase all the evidences of possible war crimes. There are now 40,000 graves on the outskirts of Mariupol. Those people who were killed by bombs, but also those people who died from lack of medical attention, from after suicides. There was an epidemic of the suicides in Mariupol, especially during the siege. Old people who couldn't get water or food, who couldn't go down to their basements. They were just jumping out of the windows of their houses. That's Vladimir told us. As he was a policeman, police was trying to deal with those suicide cases, but of course he couldn't stop them. So Vladimir got injured recently. He was working on the front lines, helping civilians, and the house where he was trying to help civilians got hit by a rocket. His lungs were pierced by shrapnel, but he's fine now. We thought he's going to die, but he recovered from that. The doctors escaped and re-established their hospital in Kyiv. But that hospital where we were at that time was hit. The tank did shoot the hospital right above the place we were standing. One patient died. We found everyone, all the families, everyone you saw on the screen. We found almost everyone.
You mentioned bargaining chip, and that's about border funding. I want to talk about funding, or the lack thereof, and I want to share two recent items from the New York Times. I'm sure that Vladimir Putin and his closest allies, Tucker Carlson and Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, would label both of these fake news, but I think we know they're true. The first is a news story from Ukraine. I quote in part that the Ukrainian army is now engaged in a desperate fight to hold back the Russian onslaught. Across the entire 600-mile front, Ukraine is short on ammunition without renewed American military assistance, and it is struggling to replenish its own depleted forces after 2 years of brutal fighting. That's the news on the ground. The second is from today's newspaper, and it's an opinion column by Thomas Friedman, and he writes in part, "Have no doubt, if we did just surrender Ukraine, Putin's next destination could be the Baltic states or Poland. So surrendering Ukraine now could be one of the most expensive things we could do." So we have your film, we know what's happening. How does public sentiment change around funding so that we don't abandon Ukraine? Because if we do, it is going to be a fiasco.
You see, here's the problem for me as a filmmaker and as an international journalist. It's not my job to try to convince anyone of anything. My job is to inform people and to try to do that in the best way possible with as much context as possible, which is so needed in the times of misinformation and misinterpretation. It's easy to misinterpret and to change meanings of what you see in 1 minute or 2 minute pieces. But when you see the context in a film, then it's much harder to be deceived by manipulations. So my job is to bring as much context as possible, and I do work on the second film, which is about what is happening right now on the front lines and what's the mood there. And I follow a lot of Russian news as well, seeing how they see that war, how they motivate their people, and that's another very important thing to mention. They present this war to their people, to civilian society which supports the war, and to soldiers as war not against Ukraine, but war against US and Europe. So they are openly stating that they are at war with you and with Europe. And that's their motivation. Seriously, like that's how they see it. It's quite dangerous not to notice that. It can be fatal if this is noticed too late. And Ukraine made this mistake. We underestimated the danger of having such a aggressive neighbor.
You just said we underestimated. And I'm wondering about how, in your making of this movie, how much you're making it as a documentary filmmaker, how much you're making it as a Ukrainian citizen, and if those two things are hard to keep separate in filming and in editorial.
You see, when I'm on the ground, when I'm filming, you actually see how engaged I am. I am part part of the community. I wouldn't say that's exclusive to Ukraine. I was working before that in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Gaza, in Syria, everywhere. The loss of human life is devastating. Everywhere these tragedies require attention, and everywhere when there is someone who needs help, you reach out and try to help. It's just when it's in Ukraine, when it's your home, when it's your community, then you get so much more emotional. Then it's actually just hard to work because you want to drop the camera and just try to do something. Because it's so frustrating sometimes. You can't really stop a bullet with a camera. You cannot stop a bleeding. When the child is bleeding out, you cannot take a picture and stop the bleeding, right? So you feel useless at times. Even if people keep telling you, yeah, you have to film this, you have to send it and show it, still you feel like you're not doing enough. And yeah, these bombs are not just destroying houses, these bombs are destroying your childhood memories, your identity. That's really painful. But working for AP helps because that's when it helps you to find the right balance. If you saw the film, it's not like I avoid certain opinions. We show all the variety of reactions, all the variety of opinions, and I react to them as human and as Ukrainian, but they're still there. And the tone of the narration also was hard to find, because first it was too emotional, too engaged, then it was too cold, and it was important to find the right way to tell the story without without moralizing anyone or imposing my emotions on anyone. So that's a delicate line.
You are at first doing two things, and that is getting images and getting those images out. That's your job. At what point does that change? Is it while you're still in Mariupol that you start having conversations about maybe there's a movie here, even though you have all this footage that you don't know if you'll be able to get out of the country? Because you certainly can't upload 30 hours of high-def video. At what point does that become part of the conversation, and does it change the way you're working in Mariupol?
The only conversation I could have is an internal conversation with myself. With the editor, there is barely time to talk about the security situation, evacuation strategy, news from other fronts, because people kept coming and saying, hey, does Ukraine still exist as a country? Nobody knew anything. So I had to know what's happening outside of Mariupol as well. I think the understanding that this story is much more symbolic and much more important for Ukrainian history and for the modern history, if I may say, came after the maternity hospital bombing. I remember seeing rescue workers carrying Irina on a stretcher, now we know her name, through this rubble and burning cars, and I remember how shocked I was, and I remember this feeling that this is so significant and it has to be captured and it has to be shown. But then it just makes the story of Mariupol so much more symbolic than just the story of one city. And it did become a symbol of that image became a symbol of Mariupol, and Mariupol itself became a symbol of other Ukrainian cities that got destroyed. So at that moment, I knew that there's a bigger story there, and you can even actually see how after that moment the editing of the film changes and the shots change, like the way I film and approach scenes changes. But really, survival was a priority, and we started assembling and talking about the film only when we got out.
Documentary filmmakers are often faced with decisions and dilemmas, some of which almost become existential moral quandaries. And some of the decisions are what serves the story best And does that come at the expense of the people we are filming? And the other is kind of a corollary of that, which is what might be bad for your subjects is good for the film. Meaning that the images that are the most horrific are also the most powerful for the movie. And I'm wondering how you navigate those issues, both if you're even able to in real time, and then maybe equally important in editorial when you're deciding what images you are and are not going to include.
That's a great question. One of the biggest challenges probably in making the film. In the moment, of course, you know you have to film everything. Of course, with respect, without invading space of people who are vulnerable in their most vulnerable states. So there is a specific ethics around that, and how you talk to them after that, and how do you connect with people after they live through these events and you film them. All that considered, then you get to the editing room, and a lot of that footage already made to news to the world because it was so urgent. Russia was saying they're not bombing civilians, and it was obviously not true, and it was obviously opposite to what we saw, and that was so urgent. That's why it was so urgent and necessary to show that. When we were making the film, we approached it in a more careful way. Of course, the priority is respect to the victims. Of course, at the same time, you don't want to sanitize anything, because the worst thing you can do in a war film is to make war look acceptable. When people see it and say, hey, well, actually it's not so bad, it's fine. You know, it's bad, but not so bad. It has to be terrifying. It has to break your heart, because that's how it really is. Even worse. So you have to get there. That's the purpose. And get there together with the audience. But then again, if you throw in everything, you have, unfortunately, I have more children who died. I feel more children who died, and more injured people, and more tragedies, and I wanted all of that there. But it's also important to consider that there is a theme of the film, and then you have to be faithful to the theme. Let's say it's an impact on the family. It's the impact of war on family, and that's the theme, and that's how you approach the editing process as well. You choose scenes and shots which tell that story.
There is obviously a tremendous amount of death and suffering in this film, and I think I speak for a lot of people in the audience. One of the most difficult moments to watch is the birth of the child, and whether or not that baby is stillborn or will breathe. It's harrowing to watch, and I wonder what it was like to film it, because you're looking at this in real time, and I can't imagine what's going through your mind as this is unfolding.
Yeah, that was, I think, the moment which is the most emotional moment of everything that happened in Mariupol, for me at least. And yeah, we didn't know if the child survived in the beginning, and it was horrifying. And when the child starts crying, that one of the doctors tells me, and it's not in the film, but I remember clearly how he tells me that people were only dying in this room. And this is the first human who was born here. And it was like a present from God. And you could see how everyone was just desperate before, and now they had strength to carry on. And then, of course, immediately 2 minutes after that, bombs started to fall around the hospital, and nurses were hiding, like covering the child with their bodies, and it's, again, just so strong. This memory is with me, and my daughter was 7 months old at that point. Of course, I was thinking about her.
There are shots in the film that maybe you don't remember when you're filming, but obviously they come up in editorial, where you put your camera down and you're having a conversation. So there's two things that are going on. You're still rolling because you probably don't want to miss anything, but you also want to have some sort of human connection to the people you're talking to, and you include them in the edit of the film. Were you aware of those things happening when they happened, or did you not realize it until you started cutting the film together? Because it really reveals a lot in real time about how you were thinking in those moments.
I did not remember about those moments. I didn't know they even existed. I mean, I knew that something was there, but I didn't consider them as a part of a film and that's where the good editor comes in. Michelle Meister is amazing PBS frontline editor, and she kind of grabbed them and said, "Hey, we need this." And I said, "Oh, wait, everybody will see what a terrible cameraman I am." So she said, no, this is, if we don't have this, then we don't have a human experience, then we're just watching people suffering, but we don't connect with them. This is what makes this experience personal. And again, I really didn't want this film to be about me, and it's not. So you do have a personal perspective, you have a journalistic perspective at times, but it's still not my story. So we had to keep that in mind. But yeah, that was something that she found, and it was amazing because I didn't know about that.
It's almost a throwaway line in the film, but when you're leaving Mariupol, you talk about the hard drives under the seats. You are able to upload some images and some video from inside Mariupol, but without those hard drives, there's no movie. What is in those hard drives? How many hours of video are you able to get out? Because I imagine without that, there's no film.
We had several options what to do with it. All the cards, all the hard drives were completely full. I just couldn't find any more, and I couldn't keep filming. So that was it. That one of the reasons why we left. And Vladimir was insisting that we have to get the originals out because he has this police officer mind that he thinks about war crimes and okay, well, you have to have EXIF data in these files and they have to be original files to be used as a proof.
He's really thinking about the metadata.
Yeah, he is.
Smart guy.
Yeah. And we had several options what to do with them. First, we thought we hide them in the city and then we send someone after city is taken, and maybe we'll try to do that, but it was too, they were too important and there was still so much unpublished footage there. Then we thought maybe we'll give them to some civilians that are leaving the city, but then we didn't want to endanger those people, and so we risked taking them with us in a car. The most important card was micro SD card with like core footage, and it was hidden in a tampon, and our field producer was Elisa. She hid the tampon. Oh. So that's the way to smuggle stuff.
Oh my God!
And even for men. It's not the first time I'm smuggling stuff out of war zones, important footage. That's how you do it. That's one of the ways how you do it. So we thought through all of that, and then again, as we are driving through the checkpoints, it's not just you drive randomly. We had Vladimir's family, and he was risking his family. So, and there were these 15 Russian checkpoints, but it was quite chaotic at that point. So a lot of cars were going, and the car was really pierced by shrapnel. We scotch taped it a lot, so the windows will not be seen through, and we broke one of the doors. So on a checkpoint, you couldn't open the back door where I was sitting. And one more instruction I gave to Vladimir's family is that as soon as you arrive on a checkpoint, they still had like a bunch of small candies. I said, we arrive at a checkpoint, you have a Russian coming in and like looking inside the car. You, first of all, you give them something and you start talking immediately. So this car arrives to the checkpoint, these guys are looking inside a car and they start talking. Everybody start talking, and you don't give them time to think. You know, they just, oh, what happened to us? Oh, we're so hungry. Or the car is broken. Or bombs are falling. Or where is the next crossing? And that works. You know, you distract attention, and they're like, okay, just go. So that's another trick.
You leave Mariupol, and then you go back to your hometown, Kharkiv. Kharkiv has not been spared in the war. It's been heavily bombed. And you go back to a city that, even though it's not under siege, has all the resemblance of Mariupol. And that's where I suspect you start working on the film. How does that affect your mindset when your physical surroundings are as if you're still in Mariupol and this is your hometown?
Yeah, it was before Kharkiv, there was Bucha. And during Bucha, there was a funeral of a friend photographer who was killed near Kiev. He was shot dead by Russians in the head. His name is Max Levin. So it was a funeral of this photographer. There was Bucha, and then it was Kharkiv. And I specifically requested Kharkiv as a hometown. And my editors told me, "Are you sure? You can take a rest, actually." And I was like, no, I need to go there. So I went there, and it was heavily bombed. It was kind of a strange and deja vu, because I could see the same images again, but in a different city. Now it was my hometown, and I could see these houses where I grew up, and people, just dead people next to the place where I lived for a long time, and they were just killed by this bomb. My school got bombed. So it's all this surreal. That's why I say you feel like your memories are being destroyed, not only the town. And we started editing already. So during the day, I would go and shoot this aftermath of the bombings, and then I come back and I start editing over the Zoom. The footage was, by that time, was already transcribed, and it was in Boston, so we kept editing. These time zones worked for us, but I was psychologically completely devastated, because I started revisiting Mariupol again and again. It was probably the hardest time.
Early in the film, a Ukrainian doctor says this to your camera: "Film how these motherfuckers are killing civilians. Show this Putin bastard the eyes of this child, and all these doctors who are crying, rotting bastard." Did part of his message stay with you throughout the film? Because in sports, it's like win one for the Gipper. This guy is saying, you can't abandon us as a storyteller. You have to show the world this. And as you pointed out, there's nobody else in Mariupol. They're all in Kyiv. So was that in the back of your mind or the front of your mind as you're working, or do you even kind of set that aside?
He was not the only one. You know, there were many people. Of course, we didn't want to put all of them because it would be repetitive for the film. But yeah, there were many people like that who were saying this, and I feel that they were probably saying that not because they thought something will change, but more of that they wanted to know that they are heard. So that's what probably was in the back of my mind. The fact that people need to express themselves, to be, to know that they're not ignored. Yes, maybe NATO forces didn't come and liberate the city, but it didn't break the siege. But at least they heard, they were concerned, right? And that gives you power not to give up, at least.
I want to ask you about your relationship with your editors. Now, I worked at the Associated Press covering a different kind of war zone. It was Hollywood, but you are in the thick of it, and you're sending out incredible images that, as a news organization, they love. And yet, they know that you are in harm's way. So if you're having conversations with your editors about what they need versus what you need, how does that play out in terms of your own personal safety and the demands of the news cycle and what they want from you as a reporter and video journalist?
Well, that one is, that dynamics was established many years ago with editors. The good part that they trust me because I've been through different wars, and it's not even the first siege I've been through, surprisingly. But I think their main question is, their main job is actually to stop me in the right moment, to pull back. And that helps because when you get caught up in the moment, however experienced you are, and it doesn't matter if you're doing news or a film, you get caught up in this, especially when you feel that this is so important. Then it's important that your colleagues nearby, that's where you need a good team who you trust. They will say, hey, this is the limit, you can't go further. But then the editors as well do that. So I never felt pushed forwards, on contrary.
This film received a BAFTA award for Best Documentary. It's up for Producers Guild, obviously an Academy Award. You won a DJ Award, which is all about, recognition of the film, but also reminder to people who maybe haven't seen it that they need to see it, that it's important. And I remember when the film Navalny came out several years ago, I asked the director, Daniel Rohr, not that you would encourage this, but would you be happy if your film was pirated and exhibited somehow on the black market in Russia? And do you have any evidence if it has, if people outside of Ukraine have seen this film? Because this is as important as it is for the people in America to see this film. It feels like it's equally important for the people in Russia to see it as well.
So in US it's available on the YouTube for free, and it was one of the things that I loved, why I loved working with PBS Frontline. For Russians it is accessible via a VPN, so if they want, they access this film for free as well. They don't have to pirate anything. There are probably pirate versions of it, but I'm not sure about that. I wasn't specifically looking. But it's accessible for everyone who wants to see it. And that's actually, recently quite a lot of European channels acquired it, but it just happened recently, and that means the millions of people will see it. But it happened after the film got shortlisted, so it really, really helps. We are inviting everyone into the very uncomfortable experience. Yes, important, but it's still uncomfortable, and many people prefer not to do that, and many channels prefer not to scare their audiences. Maybe scare, not the right word, just to push away. But recognition really helps to establish the importance and help exposure of the film.
This is my last question. Have you been able to share it with the people who are in the story? Have you been able to go back to Ukraine, maybe Kyiv, and show it to people there? And I can't imagine what that screening was like to show it there, but can you talk a little bit, if you had that opportunity, what that experience was like and what you took away from it?
Yeah, that was amazing for everyone. It was hard and amazing because we screened it first in a huge cinema theater for 600 people in Kyiv. And again, after the war started, going to cinema is almost like an impossible experience for people. They don't do that. So it's a rare occasion when people could actually gather together, and there were a lot of people from Mariupol and a lot of Ukrainians who experienced these events in different cities, and we had psychologists there just in case if anyone experiences panic attacks. because we didn't know what would be the effect. Maybe it's gonna be traumatizing, even more traumatizing than before, but actually it was contrary. So the two things surprised me. The first thing that surprised me, and people came out and they said they saw a lot of hope in the film. And I was like, what? Where? And they said, look, every tragedy you see on the screen, every moment of pain, no one is ever alone. There is this sense of community that is there. There is a doctor or a neighbor or a journalist or someone who's near people in pain. And that sense of community, that's what gave them hope. And then I think that's what the psychologist told me, that they experienced their trauma, their suppressed trauma, in a safe environment. They pulled it out from that suppressed depth, and they experienced it together again as a community in a safe environment. And that's actually how the beginning of collective treatment starts for the nation and for these people specifically. So it was actually much more hopeful than I thought it would be.
Before I thank our director, I want to thank you for coming out, and while he won't say it, I will. This is not a time to abandon Ukraine. So recommend this film to others. Recommend that your representatives make sure that Ukraine gets the money it needs to fight this war. Mstyslav Chernov, thank you so much for making this movie.
Thank you.